Okay, so before we go too far in refactoring our code, I just want to talk about asynchronous code and what we're doing at the moment and the way that we're going to do it throughout the rest of this course. So what we have here inside our load activities, this is our only asynchronous method inside our activity store just now. And what we're doing here is we're going to our agent activities.list, and our list method returns a promise. And we can see this if we hover over the list method, then what we get back from this is a promise which contains our activities, our array of activities. Now with a promise, what we can do is say what to do when this promise is fulfilled, and we do this inside this len statement. And then in this case, we're going through our activities, we're modifying the activity date, and then we're pushing the activities into the activities array. And in this particular example, we've got a finally, and in the finally, this says what to do after everything else is finished, whether the request was fulfilled successfully or even if it was rejected, then we always execute the finally block. What we can also use inside promise chains is a catch. And this attaches a callback for the rejection of a promise. And inside our catch, we can specify the error that would be caught. And then, for example, we could say console.log and pass in the error. And I'll just reformat this just to make it a bit clearer. So this is promise len chaining. And this works absolutely fine. There is absolutely no problems with using promise chaining to deal with promises that are returned from our asynchronous methods. We don't execute any of the code inside here until this has been fulfilled. But there is an alternative, and it's to use async await instead of using promise chaining. And it's often said that async await is really just syntactic sugar for a promise chain. And it probably comes down to personal preference territory lists, but my personal preference is to use mostly async await. I'm not 100% committed to use async await on every single possible occasion, but I do find it makes our code look a little bit cleaner, because if we have lots of len statements, these can drift over to the right of our page or our code editor, whereas if we have lots of awaits in an async method, then these will go downwards instead of rightwards. So what we'll do is we'll just refactor this into an async await rather than using the promise chain. And to do this, we need to give the method an async operator. And when we do this, we have the ability to use await inside our code. So what I'll do, I'll add a variable called activities, and I'll set this equal to await, and then I'll just copy the agent activities.list. Now what's going to happen with using the await keyword is that we block the execution of anything below this await keyword until this has been fulfilled. And what we can do is I can just take the existing code that we have for our activities, and I could just paste them below the await keyword or the await method. And this is only going to take place after this has been fulfilled, so exactly the same as the len statement. But what we should also do, because we don't have the .catch available inside an async await method, then we need to wrap this inside a try catch block. So if something goes wrong with this particular method, then we can catch the error from this. So what we'll do is, after our loading initial, we'll create a try catch block, and I'll specify the error, and we'll just console.log any errors we get at the moment. And I'll take our async method and put it inside the try block. Now what we also need to do is turn off our loading initial after the method is successfully completed. And that means after we've received our activities and after our activities array or our activities observable has been populated with our activities. So I'll just turn off the loading indicator and set this to false. And we also need to do the same thing inside our catch block here as well. Otherwise, if we do have a problem, then we'll always be loading the initial values. And then what we can do is just remove this particular code as we don't need this anymore. So this is exactly the same thing, but using an asynchronous method. And what it's also important to note is that even though we're not actually returning anything from this method, when we use an async method, we're implicitly returning a promise, even if we don't specify a return in this particular method. And we can see that quite clearly when we hover over the load activities, its return type. So we haven't actually changed anything here. Everything is still the same, but instead of using a promise chain, we're now using the async and await to make our asynchronous calls. And this is what we'll use with our asynchronous methods for our code in this particular application. And like I say, it's kind of a personal preference. There's no performance benefits. There's no real difference in what we're doing here, because this is just syntactical sugar over a promise then chain. And what we should find is if we just go back and take a look at our application, nothing's actually changed. We still got our loading spinner. We still see our list of activities. But like I say, this is the approach we'll use with async code in our application. And what we'll take a look at next is we'll take a look at refactoring our create activity method to use our MobX store. And we'll take a look at that next.